Waterbury Clock Company in Waterbury, Connecticut, came to the M&H Zinc Company and ended up in the office of Frederick Matheson, who was the secretary of the company. Matheson was used to selling zinc by the ton. This man walked in and made a request that startled Mr. Matheson. He made a request that he wanted to buy about 4 pounds of zinc. And Mr. Matheson asked, why would you want to buy 4 pounds of zinc? And so this man began to explain his idea to Matheson, an idea that was to change the world of clockmaking forever. Charles Stahlberg came to LaSalle, Peru with an idea. This idea, a pure, immaterial nothing, would go on to revolutionize the clock industry and make timepieces affordable to the masses at a period in history when the common people desperately needed affordable timepieces. In those days, clocks were works of art. They were gears and pinions and everything else, and you had to be of the upper class to afford a timepiece. Stahlberg, much like Bettendorf, right down the street, said, why don't we just cast the inner workings out of one piece of metal? So the clock workers and makers of the day, that was heresy. You know, you're going to take something and ruin it. So he came west as the United Clock Company. And Stahlberg and 4 others from the Waterbury Clock Company, men by the name of Cartwright, Dolph, Patton, and Klein, were the original workforce that was known as the United Clock Company. Matheson enrolled a number of local investors to start the company, and it began operations where else in LaSalle County? But in the back of Brilski's Choice Wines and Liquors, located at 118 St. Mark's Street in Peru. St. Mark's Street happens to be Route 6, about where the west end of Westclox is today. Okay? This was in 1885. From these humble beginnings grew an industrial behemoth, giving work to thousands and evolving into the largest clock corporation in the world. Mr. Roth built that railroad, and he built the CB&Q bridge. Does anybody remember that bridge that used to run across the river? It was a swing bridge. It would swing out, remember?
Yeah.
Okay, then it would come in, the railroad bed is still down there, into LaSalle, and there was a viaduct that you would go under to come into LaSalle. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah.
Right? And then right next to the canal, there's some stone piers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it would go across the canal, and it would go down Water Street and right into Illinois Zinc. So that was the main coal supply to the Illinois Zinc Company. And Mr. Matheson was very impressed with Mr. Roth. So he offered him a job at the M&H, which he took. And lasted about 6 months and said, I really don't like it here. I'm going to go build railroads again. But there was a problem. He fell in love with Mr. Matheson's niece. And so in 1889, he brought Mr. Roth back to take over this fledgling little clock company and was told to make something of it because it was a loser. Mr. Roth was fond of telling the story of how on every Friday night he would get into his carriage, cross the bridge into LaSalle, and proceed to the sprawling giant that was the Matheson and Hagler Zinc Company. He would walk into the office of Frederick Matheson and would be greeted by the all too familiar phrase in Mr. Matheson's deep German accent, how much dis week, Mr. Roth? And Roth loved how on one such evening he was able to reply, this week, Mr. Matheson, she runs by herself. Matheson had a vision, and it was a vision to bless several generations of Illinois Valley residents, a community, state, country, and the world. Workers were able to better their lives of their children and grandchildren because they had steady employment for nearly 100 years at a place called Westclox. Another picture.